Hi, and welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today I'd like to share a tutorial to make my 3D big block baby quilt. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today I'd like to show you how to make the 3D big block baby quilt. This is a fun and simple project that has really dramatic impact. The quilt can be made from fat quarters or from regular yardage, and it is so cute. But the key to this quilt is selecting the right fabrics. So you can see the 3D element of the blocks comes from having a distinct light, medium, and dark in each color. So select your fabrics wisely, download the pattern from my website at bitsandpiecesquilting.com, and join me in making this quilt. This is the unit we're going to be making. This is the blue block. You can see I've got dark blue, medium blue, and light blue for the floor, the right wall, and the left wall. And then they're framed in order to give that three-dimensional look. So let me show you how to cut these blocks. I'm going to show you how to cut using the medium for the red block. So this is a 6.5-inch strip cut salvage to salvage. You can see the salvage edges here. Pressed and cut at 6.5 inches. The first thing I'm going to do is cut the two medium colored triangles. If we go back to the blue block, you can see that we need 2 mediums, 2 darks, and 2 lights. And then each of those is framed with the opposing, the lighter and the darker and the medium colors. So from the medium red, we need 2 triangles, plus we need enough framing strips for 2 other blocks. The first step is to cut the 60-degree triangles. You can use a regular ruler that has the 60-degree lines marked on it. This is a little more complicated, but most quilters have at least a basic ruler. So to use that 60-degree line, you line that up against the edge of your fabric, like this, and then this gives you the perfect angle to cut. Like I said, it's a little bit more complicated, but can still be done. Just be careful to take your time and make sure you get your angles right. I would then flip the whole thing and line it up again because I'm right-handed. I'm lucky enough, however, to have another ruler. I have the Super Sidekick, and this is a 60-degree triangle on the Super Sidekick ruler. So this is the tool I'm going to use to cut. This tool also has a 6.5-inch line and a flat edge so that I'm able to line it up onto my 6.5-inch strip of fabric and cut the 2 triangles. My fabric is doubled, salvage to salvage edge, and I'm just going to cut along the ruler. I'm going to flip this around because this, as I said, I'm right-handed, and it's easier for me just to cut right-handed and safer rather than trying to cut left-handed or upside down. So flipping the ruler, lining up that first cut again in order to get the second cut. If I were using my regular ruler, I would use the 60-degree lines. Again, I would probably use it in this direction in order to line up the 60-degree angle here and then use that cutting edge to cut my piece. So from here we have the 2 medium triangles that we need for the red block. These will go into my scraps for something else. And from this leftover piece that's 6.5 inches wide, you want to cut this into 2 2-inch strips, and that will leave you with 1 2.5-inch strip that you can add to your collection of bits and pieces. So I'm just going to fold this up because my ruler is only a 12-inch ruler, and I'm going to cut 2 2-inch strips. 1, 2, And that will leave me with a 2.5-inch strip, which is also handy if I make a miscut on the others. So that might go into my scrap collection if I don't need it for other issues. These two then get cross-cut, one into a 12-inch piece and one into a 14-inch piece. And again, the fabric's doubled, so I'll get 2 of each one. And that will be enough to make the side sashing, these side sashings on the blocks to sew our tumbling blocks. So I've just snipped these ends off, and I will cut this first one into 12 inches. They don't have to be perfect. I'm just going to line them up on my mat, go across 12 inches and give that a slice. And on the other one, line it up on the mat up to 14 inches and give it a slice. These leftover bits and pieces will go into my scrap collection for a future project. These don't have to be perfect. You could probably get away with 11 inches. You might even get away with 10.5, although that would be pushing it. 12 inches, as you'll see, gives us enough that we can trim and square nicely as we go to piece the blocks. Let me show you how to cut the pieces for one of the large tumbling blocks from a fat quarter. So I'm going to use this yellow fat quarter. This will be the darkest of the 3 pieces I need for the yellow block. To start, I'm going to cut a 6.5-inch strip, and from that 6.5-inch strip, I'm going to cut my 2 60-degree triangles. So I'm lucky enough to have a 12.5-inch ruler that I'm going to use. I almost always do it this way. I'm going to measure out 6.5 inches plus a little bit extra for the raw edge. Instead of trying to cut off just a tiny little bit to square it up, I'm going to start with a little bit extra for the piece that I need. So that is 6.5 inches plus an extra. And then I'll flip this piece over and now square it up to the perfect 6.5 inches. Like so. From this strip, I need to cut 2 60-degree triangles. So I am using my Super Sidekick ruler. This is useful for a bunch of different projects, and including diamonds that I've made in a previous project for some friends. So there's a 6.5-inch line on the Super Sidekick. This is a 60-degree ruler with a flat square here. What the manufacturers have done is they've taken off the extra point, which is essentially just saving you a 1/4 inch of fabric. Because if I were to cut this 60-degree triangle to have 3 perfect points, I would need an extra 1/4 inch of fabric. I would need 6 3/4 inches in order to have enough fabric to get that last point. But because I use 1/4 inch seams, cutting this corner off by a 1/4 inch helps me line up where my seams go, but also saves me a 1/4 inch of fabric. So I'm going to cut my 6.5 inch 60-degree triangles like this on one side, flip this around, flip the ruler over, and cut, let me make sure that you can see this, and cut the other side. This will go into the bits and pieces pile to see what I can make with those for another project. So there are the 2 60-degree triangles for this project. From this, I need to see if the pieces are big enough. I need 2 pieces. Yes, so this should be big enough to cut this into 2 inches. This will be big enough. I'm going to need 2 pieces that are 12 inches long and 2 pieces that are 14 inches long. So we'll be able to get one of those pieces from this. And then these are actually getting a little bit too small. So this will go into my scrap bin. And from the rest of the fat quarter, I'm going to cut, I think I need 2 more strips. Let's just make sure. 1 strip at 2 inches. And I want 12 inches here. Oh, that's annoying. That's not going to be enough, is it? All right. And then I'm going to have to cut 2 more strips to get the 14-inch pieces. So that's the leftover for the fat quarter. So from these 2, I need 14-inch pieces. I'm just going to lay those down on my mat. Normally I don't like using the mat as a measuring tool, but in this instance, because we actually trim these down later, this doesn't have to be exact. So 14 inches is here. So there you have it, 2 14-inch pieces, 2 12-inch pieces, and 2 60-degree triangles, all from a fat quarter, with a few bits and pieces left over to make a very large tumbling block. To sew these units together, I'm going to start with this medium in my red block again, and I'm going to sew a dark red onto one and a light red onto the bottom. A light red meaning pink, the lightest of the 3 colors, and the darkest to the medium block. You'll see that the ruler I used has a square end across the top for the 6.5-inch triangle. And because of the way that we cut the block, these edges along the side, and I'm going to stretch it lightly, are bias edges. You can see the stretch there. And from top to bottom, from this edge to this edge, if I pull on it, you can see that there's no give. That's the strongest lack of pull across the block. So I'm going to start by sewing these strips to the bottom of these blocks. And to do that, I'm going to take one. So we'll use the dark red. And I want to line this up and center it as best I can. The reason for the overhang, and you'll see when we go to trim it, is once this is sewn, we want to cut this on the angle so that you get the dark red has the same angle to it as the triangle, and that's why you need a little extra on both sides. So with that lined up and a nice 1/4-inch seam, I'm just going to sew that across. So there we go, a 1/4-inch seam. I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and I'm going to press these seams open. It reduces the bulk, it makes everything lay flatter, and while quilting generally presses to one side, for this project, as all the seams come together in the final block, reducing the bulk by pressing the seams open is your best bet. So let me show you that one more time with the next one. So again, the ruler I use, the 60-degree triangle ruler, puts a flat edge across the top here. And this is the grain of the fabric, so there's no stretch there. These are bias edges, and there's a huge amount of stretch in the side, so you want to be careful. The bias edges actually make putting these units together really forgiving. But to start this, I want to start with sewing this first piece of border fabric onto the bottom. So again, I'm going to line it up, center it on this strip, and sew it down a 1/4 inch. Actually, that's not very centered, is it? Let me just scooch that up a bit. There we go. So there we are. And now I'm, like I said with the other, I'm going to take that to the ironing board and press the seam open. Let me show you how to trim these blocks once they've been sewn. For this first one, I'm going to use my Super Sidekick. It's got the 60-degree triangle marks on it. I'm going to use this long side, and I'm going to line up the 60-degree angle along my sewing line and then use the straight edge to trim the block. And that's the waist. So that's a perfect edge. And then flip it around, and then flip around the ruler. Hang on. Here we go. Nope, that's not right. Wait. There we go. So lining up this 60-degree line and this straight edge lets us square up this block to retain the 60-degree triangle shape. Let me show you how to do it with just a regular ruler. So using the 60-degree angle mark on the ruler, you line that up along the edge of your block and line up the straight edge here for trimming. Because these 60-degree angle lines are so close to the top of the ruler, I can't line that up down here on my seam line because I don't have enough to trim. So that's why I'm lining up the 60-degree line on the edge of the piece that I've added to my triangle. So let me line that up. Make sure my 60-degree line is lined up here and that edge is straight. Give that a slice. And the same thing for the other direction. Hang on. Here we go. This will work. No, this won't work. Nope, that's not right either. Here we go. This is the way it works. All right, just had to spin this around enough. Again, I'm using the 60-degree mark on the ruler, lining it up along the edge of my fabric in both directions in order to get that 60-degree triangle. This is the sort of thing that gets easier with practice. But really, this is all about checking twice and only cutting once. And so we have two identical 60-degree triangles trimmed using two different tools. To sew the second side onto these triangles, you want to take your piece of fabric, in this case the dark red, and center this just the same way we added the first piece. Center this along this strip. Now, like all block making, when I sew, I try and take one approach consistently for every single block. So in this instance, the piece that I've added is up and to the left, and I'm adding the new piece onto the right-hand side. I will do the exact same thing with the next piece and every other piece as part of this project. You could add it to this side, to the other side of the block, but I think it's best to be consistent so that all of your seams go in the same direction across each of the blocks. It's just a really good habit to get into, to do things the same way when you're making multiple blocks for the same quilt. So in this instance, the first border piece I added is up and to the left. This is centered along the strip. And you can see here, because the template I'm using, because of the ruler I'm using, there's a little flat edge here. This is a 1/4 inch. And so my seam, if my seam allowance is done well, my seam will come right off the edge of that tip, as if the corner were still on this piece of fabric, and will catch that. I'll show you when I'm finished. Let me sew it. So there you have it. The seam comes straight across at a 1/4 inch and comes right off the corner where the ruler is straight across the top. So that missing corner disappears into the seam allowance. Let me show you again with this light pink. Now this piece, I just want to be a little bit careful. I want it to go on like this because I actually am running low on fabric. So let's make sure we get the angle right. So I want to center this on my strip. Like so. The first strip that I sewed is up and to the left, same way that I did the first one. And I'm going to run the 1/4 inch seam along here. Catching that corner. I'm going to press these open, trim them up like we did this first strip, and then these units will be complete and ready to assemble into our block. Once the second side is added, it is trimmed very similarly to the first side, although I think this side's actually a little bit easier. Again, I'm going to use my Super Sidekick for this one, line up the 60-degree line on the sewing line, make sure the other edge is lined up against my block, and snip off that edge. For the bottom, this is actually much easier. It's just a straight across line. You can use the 60-degree line just to double check because you do have this seam here, but you've got so much as a reference point that you can also just use a straight across. And that's your final block. That's the final unit that goes into making one part of the tumbling block. Let me show you again with the ruler. Let's see if I can get the angles right this time. So my 60-degree line is up here. That goes on the outer edge of the block on one side, and the straight line, the straight edge along the other outer edge here. And as a second double check point, you can see here that my other seam line, this seam line, is at 1 3/4 inches. These are 2-inch strips, so when you take off a 1/4 inch for seam allowance, everything is lining up perfectly. A 60-degree angle, a straight edge at 1 3/4. So let me slice that off. And then across the bottom, I can just use a straight across. Or if I'm feeling ambitious, I can use this 60-degree line, line it up here with the sewing line, and then make sure my straight edge goes across here to slice it, like so. And that's the second block. Now that I have all 6 pieces sewn and trimmed, it's time to assemble the 2 halves of the tumbling block. So to do that, let me show you how you lay it out. The dark walls, and check out Carol's video linked in the description box below because she walks you through this too, and I owe the inspiration to Carol for this. So the dark walls are on the left, and the medium walls are on the right, and the light colored wall will become the floor. So you line up the light color at the top, the light color edges at the top, with the dark wall on the left, the medium wall on the right. And then we put the other part of the dark wall here, the other part of the medium wall goes here, and then you put in the floor. And you'll see that the frames all match. So across the top of the block, you have the light frame, across the left side, you have the medium frame, and across the right side, you have the darkest frame. This then becomes the floor with the dark red as the left wall and our medium fabric as the right-hand wall. To construct the quilt, you don't sew this whole thing together. You actually sew it into halves. So I'll sew these 3 units into the right half of the unit and these 3 into the left half. And then once all of the blocks are made, we will assemble the quilt in columns rather than rows. So I'll add either another block piece here or a background piece. Same thing with the bottoms. These will get either additional pieces of blocks or columns, or background fabric to make columns that will make up the rest of the quilt. But we'll get to that stage once the 3 giant tumbling blocks are finished. So to sew this together, I'm going to match, it's very simple, sew edge to edge along this edge, press the seams open. Once that's finished, do the same thing with this last piece, but I'll show you how that goes. So let me go and sew these, and I'll bring it back in a moment. So I've sewn these first 2 pieces together, pressed the seams open, and I'm just going to give these little dog ears here and here a quick trim. And I'm just going to use my scissors to do that. Just a little snip. This will just contribute to the quilt laying a little bit more flat, making it a little easier to match things up when we get to constructing the quilt top. The next step is to sew this piece onto the 2 that we've already sewn together. So I'm going to flip this over, and here is where you want to be careful to make sure that these edges line up here. Sorry, seams. These seams line up here and here. You can pin these. I usually just eyeball it. I'll hold it into place, make sure that they're nice and lined up before I run the needle through it. And I don't really worry about pins. You could use clips, you could use pins, totally up to you. Let me sew these together. So I've sewn that piece on, that 3rd piece, and you can see, even just eyeballing it without pinning it, those corners are pretty sharp, and I'm happy with that. Like I did after I sewed the first 2 together, I'm just going to give this a little trim to trim off the dog ears here and here, just to make sure there's no extra bulk in the final seams when the final product goes together. To sew the other side, it's the same approach. Move that across. I'm going to start by sewing this piece to this piece. So just fold it over and sew down that edge, press the seam open, and then do the same with that last piece. There we go. First 2 are sewn together, press the seams open, and I'm just going to give the little dog ears a trim. You can see this is overshot by a bit. I'm just going to cut that right off and not worry about it. Trim the dog ears on this side. And now the last piece is this one, which is going to go across here. And again, I want to make sure that those corners meet as best they can. So I'll make sure to pay attention to that as I'm sewing it. And there you have it. Not bad. Those corners look pretty good, I think. I'm going to just give this a little snip. There we go. Cut the little corners off of here as well. And that is the giant red tumbling block. I think that looks so great. So I have the red one. I have the blue one already finished. Let me see if I can get this into the camera view. The blue block will go in like this. I'm not sure what order they'll go into in the final quilt. And then I still have to make the yellow block. But those three together with some white background, I think is going to make a super fun kids quilt. To cut the 60-degree angle on this strip of background fabric, I tried to use my Super Sidekick, but as you can see on the 9 3/8 inch piece, it's too short. So you can do things like line that up and then use a straight ruler along that edge and make do. That's one way to do it. Another way is to use the 60-degree line on a straight ruler. So if I line the 60-degree line across the edge of the fabric, this is the angle that I need in order to make this background piece fit with my giant tumbling blocks. So I'm going to cut that angle, and that will be the first piece of the background strips that I need for the tumbling blocks quilt. I've got the giant tumbling blocks laid out on the floor, and in terms of trying to decide how long the pieces to go above the red blocks should be, I've decided to be efficient. And so this is the piece of fabric that will be those borders, or sorry, those background pieces. I've cut the 60-degree angle here, and I'm just going to trim off this corner, sorry, this edge, and turn this into two pieces, which will then become the guide for how tall this baby quilt will be. I don't see the value in determining a random measurement and then having to cut more or less background fabric in order to get to that arbitrary measurement. I'm trying to make the very best use of the fabric that I have, and I think by cutting this piece in half and using those two pieces above the red blocks, that'll be a really efficient use of my fabric. So there you have it. The background pieces placed above the red blocks. I may decide that that's still a little bit too much. It may make the quilt a little bigger than I'm intending, but we will see how it looks when it's put together. And the final pattern, which you'll find linked on my website through a link in the description box below, will have the final measurements that I used for the final product. To trim this, I want to cut 8 inches below this point, and I have carefully folded the quilt top, lined up all of the stitching and the seams, lined it up across here, lined it up here as well to make sure that it's perfect. And I want to cut 8 inches below this point. So to do that, I could mark off and then try and draw a line, but an easier way is to use two rulers. So I have this 5-inch ruler, which is long enough to make my cut, and I have a smaller ruler. So I'm going to line up 5 and 3, gives me 8 inches. So I'm going to line up this 3-inch mark right at the point, and I'm going to make sure that this cross marking on the ruler is lined up perfectly with my seam. Then I'm going to line this ruler up nice and tight against it, and also make sure that one of these cross markings is perfectly lined up with the seam. That should give me a nice straight cut. Another place to double check is here at the edge, where I can also see that a cross marking is perfectly aligned. So just to double check, 3 inches plus 5 inches is 8. I'm going to just hold the main ruler and give it a slice. There we go, quick and easy. I've done the same thing on the other side of the quilt. I've folded it very carefully, measured off 3 inches to the point, and lined up the second ruler, making sure the cross markings at the seams and the top and bottom are all nice and square, and that will give me an 8-inch background on this piece. The final quilt is 44 by 51.5 inches, which I think is a perfect size for a baby or a small child. And the big block colors are super fun. I've shown you the design process as I've made this quilt, and I actually cut off a lot more of the background fabric across the top and the bottom of the quilt than I actually expected. But that's what the design process is for, and the pattern on my website will have all the details for the exact sizes for you to cut. I've quilted the fabric with a nice tight free motion quilting in the background and some outline stitching, stitch in the ditch, and some outline stitching across the blocks. I really wanted them to stand out, and an all over design I thought was going to muddy the impact of those three-dimensional blocks. I hope you enjoyed making the 3D big block baby quilt. Let me know in the comments down below what colors you've made the quilt in. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining me, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.